and, and Leslie Gray for the invitation to speak with you tonight. It's an honor to be able to apply a little what I've learned about John Elgin Woolf to some recurring questions about his comparative place in post-World War II residential architecture in Southern California. Now, this is not going to be, oops, now I can't, hold on. There we go. It's not going to be a linear history or overview of all of Woolf's work per se, highlighting his well-known houses for their architectural beauty, inventiveness alone. Wonderful as they are, and you'll see some of them, what you'll see here mostly goes to establishing both a place and time, the causes, and his place in time, the effects he had. So we start by looking at the assessment of Woolf's place on the appreciation spectrum then and now. And we're talking then, the 1940s and 50s and 60s. And now what's happening, what that has given birth to in the current day. Recognizable elements of his style, how his designs developed, and the effects they had on others, and how they compare to the housing industry of his time. Real quick for background, John Woolf was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1908. He was educated in the Beaux-Arts School at the Georgia Institute of Technology, eventually becoming a licensed architect and working for a few respected local practices in Georgia. In 1934, he joined the National Park Service in Georgia, while also studying still extant antebellum revival residences in the South. That's a nice compliment to his Beaux-Arts training and a lifelong appreciation of the Palladian. Mixed very well. Around 1936, young John Woolf embarked on a journey to the West Coast. Stop in New Orleans exposed him to the unique appeal found in mansions of the Vieux Carré and the fanciful houses of the Garden District, which would influence his later buildings. Certainly that very fanciful wrought iron would be seen throughout his career. Woolf was on his way to Hollywood in hopes of landing work as an extra in Gone with the Wind, which was a nationwide subject of interest back in 1937. And that's what the Scarlett O'Hara is there on the bottom left. It's a continuation of the style, but that's what he was going to try and do. He never even got a call back for the extra position, but clearly was destined for another kind of stardom. The term Hollywood Regency wasn't really born until 1982 or so with the writings of John Chase, the scholar and city planner in West Hollywood. But it really distills the essence of the theatrical glamour of the screen at the time and the way it found its way into the architecture being built outside of movie theaters, as Sylvia mentioned earlier. You see that the tall doors and blank fronts of these sets for Lost Horizon, the black and white classicism of Cedric Gibbons and Van Ness Polgaze, James Dolina. Top Hat is there with the Venetian Fantasia over the canal. These were made for people to look at, and people, once they looked at them, wanted to live them. So here's what greeted John Woolf as he arrived in Los Angeles in 1937. There were Regency and Georgian style buildings by accomplished architects already on the scene, as we see here. Sunset Plaza was and still is, a glamorous shopping, dining, and nightlife center along the Sunset Strip. S. Charles Lee's movie theaters and his 1935 Max Factor building in Hollywood show the classic application of the flattened architectural elements and display case windows that resemble fine cabinetry as much as they do any building. One of the biggest events of that era, now Woolf didn't get into architecture immediately, but it obviously took note of what was going on around him. One of the biggest events of the time was the highly publicized in design circles construction of a house in Bel Air, designed by James Dolina and decorated by T.H. Robeson Gibbings. It was later the longtime home of Conrad Hilton, and I think it is still one of the 5 finest houses in Los Angeles even today. Another give and take in terms of influence, I think. Paul R. Williams was already an established figure, often practicing in some of the same Regency revival style, a little more literal, as shown in his interiors for the Saks Fifth Avenue department store in Beverly Hills. That's on the left. But the photos of the Perino's restaurant in 1964, long after Woolf was well established, shows that there was some adoption of the younger architect's style. It's one of the clearest evidences I've ever seen of a back and forth between these two master architects. Not to be overlooked in this mix was the role and prominence of decorators such as William Haynes, Tony Duquette, and Elsie de Wolfe on the scene, who all knew each other. Wolf's project list even includes some design work on Elsie de Wolfe's house in Beverly Hills, where she and her husband settled after fleeing the advance of the Nazis in France on the eve of World War II. One of the questions I've always had was where the Pullman doors label came from. I knew Pullman train cars were the luxury travel of their day in the 20s and 30s. That's before airplanes, pretty much. So when I looked at Pullman cars during John Woolf's early lifetime, I saw the doors, slightly breaching the roof line, but not in a convincing way that tied to what he would come up with later. What really surprised me was seeing the oval windows that would become one of his signatures as well. Now, notice on the lower right, on the Pullman train car of 1933, the coffin-like doorway surround between the train cars, because I think those enclosing lines would be part of what provided the upward thrust that came to be one of Woolf's most recognizable devices. Now, the middle image was the first appearance of the Pullman door in 1947 on his Melrose Place studio and office. He drew a Christmas card of it featuring the image in 1951, which I think is adorable. Now, the oval coach window is one of the 5 most recognized elements of the Woolf palette, along with tall doors and windows, a mansard roof, a pool house, usually on axis with the main house, and a deep veranda with slender columns. Now, sometimes the window is not a window, it's a semicircular sculpture niche as well at left. You can see there actually is a window in there, but there's a sculpture on the keystone base. Here's something I found recently, which I'm just in love with. The first appearance of the oval window is in this house he designed for himself with Robert Sider, a handsome actor and later TV editor that Woolf met soon after arriving in Los Angeles through the social circles he entered of director George Cukor. The house was very compact, with just a living room, kitchen, single bedroom, and bathroom, with a 1-car garage squeezed in there on the south side of a mountain property in the Hollywood Hills. That's that little bit there on the left of the photo. The red line shows the footprint of the original structure. The house was expanded to the right and to the bottom by Woolf for a later owner in 1964. And which you may recognize, it looks like this today. Very soon afterward, Woolf got the commission that would launch his stellar career. The James and Mary Frances Pendleton House was groundbreaking on an intellectual level as well. It produced the advent of a couple's house, which meant very few bedrooms. As you can see in the plan, there's really only 1 master bedroom and a little guest bedroom. And almost no staff space. But the composition was created in a way that looked like a much larger mansion. You can see how that was achieved here by making a very blank and posing front with tall shuttered windows, giving no hint of what lay inside. The very strong effect of the portico and slender front doors with the pop of a mansard roof to heighten the whole. And those niches on either side of the front door. This is the keystone. It's a witty and wonderful details are everywhere in this house. I mean, I don't know how he had time to do it, because the main working drawings had to be completed, apparently, as I understand it, in 11 or 12 days from the time he got the commission, so they could start the construction right away. Here are photos of the house. Well, I'm sorry. Photos of the house during the Pendleton era are small and in black and white. So what I'm showing you here is how the house looked for almost 50 years under the ownership of producer and Paramount Studios executive Robert Evans, who bought the house in 1966. I hope they show or convey a sense of what being inside a Woolf house is like. Now, first of all, the window over the fireplace was an absolute innovation for 1941, 42. It was a bit of wizardry, really. But what I found is the first thing you notice in a Woolf house is something you feel beyond the organizational or decorative delights. It's perfect proportions. Now, especially in the principal rooms, you'll find they are just the right length, width, and crucially, height. People who don't even know architecture, I've seen them walk into these houses and say, I feel really great here. I don't know why, but I do. And I think that is the reason. Not too tall, it's not too narrow, it's not too compressed. Now, here's something that's on our plate right now in regards to this house. This is a juxtaposition of the same view, perhaps 40 or even 50 years apart. The window above the fireplace mantel would become a Woolf trademark. This was its first appearance in this house. The home is currently being entirely and respectfully restored by its new owner and supervising architect Timothy Bryant, who has an absolute genius with traditional methods, traditional decorations, and traditional architecture. There's been much discussion lately as to whether to return the mirrored flue columns on either side, as it was for the Pendletons, or replace the marble and gilded pilasters on the right, as it was done for Robert Evans. I don't know which argument has prevailed. I'm looking forward to finding out. The entire site was landscaped also very formally in the French fashion to a design by Tommy Thompson, who is also famous in Los Angeles, certainly for the fantastic work he did in so many developments, including Santa Anita Park, which is as beautiful a garden as it is a racetrack. The garden is actually part of the restoration and is being extensively restored as faithfully as possible. The pool house, as a Woolf focal point, also made its debut here in this house, which I have to keep reminding myself is over 80 years old. Its appeal was immortalized by this 1952 photo by Slim Aarons, showing the Pendletons entertaining at home on any given Sunday. During Robert Evans's residency, the pool house became a screening room and was one of the hotspots of Hollywood socializing for several decades. Well, socializing and deal making. It was between the pool and the tennis court, which was added by Evans. It sadly burnt down shortly after, in about 2003, after the photo on the left, and was never rebuilt. The views on the right show its absence from the long view. The area it occupied is blank grass there. But one of the greatest things about this restoration is the fact that the pool house and screening room are being replicated to the exact measurements as the original. This photo was taken just about a week ago by the architect. I mean, and he frets over inches. He frets over a couple of feet on the chimney in the back. It's astonishing the attention to detail that this project is awarded, and it's about the happiest restoration project I've ever seen. Now, so here are some views of the main house through time, from 1966 to as I first saw it in 2020, with all grown over with vines everywhere. The vines were all pulled off. Everything's been restored underneath, and vines will go back up. The back of the house too. You can see in 2013 the vines have completely engulfed the house. In the middle is the bedroom wing today, and the only expansion of the main house has been the addition of 2 small pavilions: a study in the master wing, which you can see there, with the windows covered by some sheeting at right. And then there's another one on the opposite side of the back facade off the kitchen. It's a breakfast and card room. And I just included a view of the brand new mansard The other one was, again, 80 years old, and it was in very poor shape. And just to reiterate how restrained the project is, there's the existing plan as we found it on the left, and as this was presented to the city of Beverly Hills to ask for variations on and permits for expansion. And the additions to the main house only total 400 square feet. It's the two green boxes, those two new pavilions that are there in green. In a hearing regarding this expansion, the city clerk had written 4,000 square feet was going to be added on, and everyone thought that was quite normal, it being Beverly Hills. But I had to, make sure that it was actually edited in the record to make sure it was 400 square feet. Now, in 1944, John Woolf established a studio office on Melrose Place. For as long as he occupied the spaces he created, it was a laboratory of romanticized design and creativity. And it still is. Melrose Place is one of the chicest shopping districts in Los Angeles to this day, and that's in large part due to the many Woolf-designed buildings on both sides of the street. There's that original Pullman door on top left from inside and out. Showroom windows on either side replace the little ovals we saw earlier. Now, the three photos at bottom right show a two-story building at the east end of the compound. Upstairs were two small apartments for rentals, where Woolf lived for a while with his partner, Robert Koch, when they first got together. And here's something I think you'll like. Woolf's vision for the entirety of the south side of Melrose Place, if he had his way and designed everything. It must have been a slow day at the office. I don't know when he could have found time to do this, but it's a lovely, lovely thing. Woolf's vision for the entirety of, Woolf's continuing exploration of small-scale living with great style continued even when he was very successful. The unbuilt, as yet, Daydream House is an exercise in those principles that Woolf would return to again and again. As I said, George Cukor played a huge role in Woolf's ascension into Hollywood life. Woolf met the director soon after arriving in LA in 1937 and became part of his very, very active social circle, even though he didn't, and that's where he got his first celebrity commissions, socializing at the director's home. And then first it was Fanny Brice who commissioned him to do a guest house in her Holmby Hills estate. Then Ira and Lenore Gershwin brought him on to redo their house. We'll see in a minute. In the early 1950s, though, George Cukor decided to build a little colony of 3 guest houses on his estate. Now, what struck me the most when I saw the plans in the archive was how very modern the elevations were. You can see they're almost shed-like. This was where I began to explore the possibility that Woolf was not the outlier I had always understood him to be, self-contained in his own aesthetic only, as though he were completely divorced from the world outside. Here's the house's interiors in 1980. Now, by the way, these guest houses were three bedrooms and a maid's room and 3 bathrooms and a library a lot of the time. So not exactly the little cottages that you might think. You can see that all the decorative elements, like moldings and even window frames, were stripped away by this time, leaving only Woolf's greatest talent, proportion, visible as the defining feature, and finishes. I want to especially point out the travertine-fronted bathroom vanity, a luxury that Woolf used in several houses. Those are drawers that actually pull out with the stone on front. The photo at bottom right shows the grouping of the 3 guest houses. The one on this page is at top right with the skylight in the living room, the circular skylight. The one at the bottom, the rather U-shaped one, was the longtime home of Katharine Hepburn. Now, the foregoing is not to say that Woolf had anything like a cuddly relationship with modernism. As Sylvia mentioned earlier in the exhibit, is the case study house number 17 by Craig Elwood, who was widely respected and really celebrated at the time. But Woolf's purchase and makeover of this house in 1962 set off a firestorm of controversy and condemnation in the design and cultural press of the day. He really just didn't like the finishes, and the layout was a little constrained. He thought he could do better. So here's what caused such a panic. The colonnade that was added on, and the copper domed roof of a new entrance hall. House and Garden has no such reservations about the remodel job. They loved it. In the enchanted hour of dusk, one might be reliving the past in a columned villa of Versailles or among the temples of Paestum. Okay, I had to look that up too. I didn't know what it was. I couldn't find Versailles, but Paestum is, a conclave of Greek temples in Italy on the Tyrrhenian coast south of Naples. So you can see the validity of their point. You can also see the standard of writing has changed a lot since 1962 in shelter magazines. But a comparison of the two plans is really what shows Woolf's, well, I think it shows Woolf's to be more gracious and better organized axially, to my mind. And I'm a big fan of Craig Elwood, but you can see the living spaces in the Woolf plan, which is at bottom, don't make the living room so squished and narrow as it was before. There's evenness on both sides with the portals into the next rooms. The kitchen is now over in a service wing where it belongs, and the master bedroom has been configured to be less of a dormitory. And the drawings of the appended entry foyer belie the notion that it's a big octagonal hall just inside the front doors, which is what you might have expected, but it's actually just a little hallway that leads into the living room or the bedroom corridor. Here's the house today. The uppity remodel has been maintained in its 1962-ish form for over 60 years, which frankly is indicative of the regard I've found many owners of Woolf homes seem to have in common. Now, the remodels for himself, many homes Woolf designed as his own residence were remodels of existing homes. In fact, I think the Cider residence was the only one he built from the ground up. Everything else was remodels. But I think this is the only one he designed for someone else and later bought back for himself and Robert before selling it to someone else, of course. It also shows one of his ongoing fascinations with the more rustic side of French architecture that was coming into fashion in the 1960s. A recent renovation of the house provided a surprise revelation for the architects at Robert A.M. Stern. I had given the interior architect at Ramsay a comprehensive look at all the plans for this house in the archive. The minor redesign from the Woolf years showed a stone-faced rustic beam ceiling garden room that was presumed to not have been realized. But guess what? Behind the drywall, there it was. They left it behind the drywall, this remodel. Also note the return of the travertine fronted vanity drawers, like in the Cupar guest house earlier. Woolf was obviously fond enough of the idea that he used it in a house of his own. And there he is, always putting windows where people don't expect them, like over the sink. Now, next on our magical rustical Regency tour, this house on Strata Quarter Road in Lower Bel Air was one that I watched being built as a teenager. I used to ride my bike after school up in those hills, like early 1970s. And it shows a progression of Woolf's at a time that I find very interesting and parallel to the more stately work most of his clients requested. The breakfast room pavilion that you see up there in the top left was added on to the back, and it harkens to his pool houses of the past. This house doesn't have a deep enough rear yard for one. But here's the plan. And what's interesting to me is that the result is a little less successful than some others. The proportions of the existing house appear to have been a little stubborn, so not as well resolved proportionally. Note the low ceiling of the very long living room. It's definitely not a perfect Woolf proportion. The staircase and interior courtyard, however, are unapologetically modern with a capital M, though the kitchen, there in the center of the three photos at right, it was what he was doing more and more in his personal spaces at the time. Again, country French was all the rage then. And he continued to play with it. This is an unbuilt design for 1968, showing Woolf's continuing experimentation with the forms and materials of Normandy and Provence. This one has no windows to the street whatsoever. All right, his remodels for others are also equally telling. This was, I mentioned earlier, Ira Gershwin was an early devoted client. This was a Spanish villa remodeled into French Riviera on Roxbury Drive. Ira's brother George lived next door until his death soon after the Ira got there. Here are more of the interiors of the Gershwin house. Now, lyrical and lovely as this is, and it was spoken about for landmarking in the city of Beverly Hills, it was razed over a weekend in 2019, reduced to rubble, and a new house has been built there. And, you know, it's very sad. This was a wonderful, wonderful place. Nearly every profile of Woolf designed dwellings tout his celebrity clientele. I want to show this one to show how he might plug in or graft on or insert new elements in an existing structure without remaking the entire thing. The Toluca Lake home of Bob Hope was built in 1936 in the English country style. It's a vast and grand estate. You know, people used to joke that you can't miss it. It's where all the streets on the map end. The outdoor back terrace and pergola there is one of the Woolf changes. The original entry hall to the house was through double doors straight into the foyer. The Hopes had Woolf add a more ceremonial space as an anteroom to the stair hall. And I love those doors on the left. I don't know if they're padded leather or faux finished wood, but I'm mad for a trapunto anything. The clearest Woolf influence is the then new game room, club room, lounge, and the dining room with its double-stepped entry up into the room. Very handsome and totally relaxed, not something we normally associate with the Regency playbook. Again, this was done in 1960. It's still modern today, it looks like to me. These remodels for comedian Paul Lynde and Jack Sasson in the area just above the Sunset Strip show that not all of them lost their Spanish-style roofs or architecture. In Lynde's case, Woolf approximated a diminutive vertical Italian palazzo, while at the Sasson house, it seems maybe a little more on the French side than Italian. So maybe I call it Monaco, right between the two. I have to say, I tried to find some info about Mr. Sasson, but I expect he's not the widely published author of contemporary divinity studies. Okay, I skipped ahead to the Pink Jewel. It was Woolf's biggest project. It was built for golfing legend and developer Johnny Dawson, or built by him. Thunderbird and Eldorado were also his creations and are, you know, incredibly important moments in Palm Springs and Palm Desert history. This was to be 364 condominiums on 155 acres with a full-service clubhouse, tennis courts. The golf course was by Ted Robinson Jr. The architecture was unlike anything the desert had seen prior. And with the bringing on of Woolf, it took on a life of its own. I mean, it became more Martinique than Morocco in terms of the architecture, but it is all pink, like the city of Marrakesh. Here's the actual realized entrance. Just a couple of years ago in 2015, it has been spruced up and the clubhouse has undergone a renovation since then, but this is still the fundamental thing that was seen for 50 years of driving up to the entrance. Members we have found buy there as much for the architecture as the golf, and a very strict architecture and landscape committee has its handful trying to keep things as they were meant to be preserved. You can even see some of the poodle trees on each side of the drive up, and that's part of what I love about it. Here's the overall effect that you can see the houses in their setting. They all have greenbelt views, and if not direct course frontage, it's almost like living in a Dr. Seuss book, I've always said. It is so fantastical. The condos themselves come in 4-floor plans. They are duplex units as shown above. The A plan is the smallest. It's only 1 bedroom, but has 2 bathrooms. And I never understood why that would be for a weekend house. But then I looked in the archive, and on one of the plans it said Mr. Bathroom and Mrs. Bathroom. And that's 1968, by the way. Now, interior views of one of the A units show the very ample scale of the primary rooms. Again, it's the proportion that is the key. Every room in this house has 10-foot ceilings, even the closets and the bathrooms. That library, by the way, used to be the walk-in closet for a weekend house. This was actually my home for 5 years, and it had been expanded in every which way possible. So it wasn't one bedroom anymore. But again, that closet was now my library, my office. The B unit is the smaller of the 2-bedroom, 2-bath offerings. You'll note that each plan comes with a private front courtyard. Some people have built out into it. Another room or extension of the kitchen. John Woolf returned to customize 2 Marrakesh homes for clients and associates. The drawing at right shows his revised plan of a B plan, adding a plunge pool to the tiny front court, a walled-off entry foyer, and a fireplace in one corner of the living room. Not all of his design or wishes for the house were realized. The drawing, you can see the wall behind the couch at the bottom is in his design, but the opening to the living room was meant to be to the right. I don't believe it was meant to be a solid wall, but a screen. The fireplace is exactly as drawn in plans, though somebody gave it a good slathering of tile somewhere in the past 20 years. And the pool was squared off and omitted the bench level brick ledge that was meant to help keep people from stumbling and tumbling in. Now, there might be about 6 private pools at Marrakesh in these courtyards, maybe more now. Note the Pullman door entry to the Woolf office again at top right. The client for this remodel was his frequent associate, Eleanor Lee, in the pink oval, you'll see it there, who this was for her. And she was one of the colleagues of his in the studio on Melrose Place. This was my second house at Marrakesh, and the only reason I gave up my first one, because I just had to have the one that he altered himself. It was an honor and a pleasure. The C plan is the larger of the 2-bedroom, 2-bath models. Woolf created a suggested octagonal entry foyer without the angled walls, but you could make it look like it was octagonal. And some have. Some people have removed that wall, and now the front door is just open into the living room. The oversized bathrooms in Marrakesh are very much a part of the appeal. They look into sheltered courtyards. Some are quite elaborate and even have showers outside. Again, for 1968, they were quite spacious. Many residents over the years have expanded the second bedrooms, which you see on the top right, by annexing the closet and golf cart space from the garage into one large room. And every house at Marrakesh has a broad, deep veranda at the back for relaxing or entertaining. The D plan is the largest and I think most plentiful plan. 3 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms in just over 2,400 square feet. It has more of everything. Even the columns along the back are a pair of columns rather than a single one. I want you to take notice of the rendering. It must have been a very early one. The mansards on every mass ended up not happening. Only the one in the center, which is in 3 parts, which was probably a construction economy. But it's also probably good because the stark forms of the volumes it's built has helped keep it more modern, not fussy. Some interior views of various D units at Marrakesh show people doing classical styles, opening up the kitchens to both the service or dining room areas. The exteriors are required to largely stay as they were designed and built. So this is where people have a lot of freedom. I'm actually broadcasting this talk to you from this very room. I'm sitting actually at that dining table right there on the lower left. The back terrace has a wonderful view towards a fountain. It's one of 4 lakes here at Marrakesh. It's furnished with fine antiques and modern art throughout by my good friend, Shepard Weinberg, who I very much appreciate having me here today. The foyer, Shepard actually went with the idea of fulfilling Woolf's idea of an octagonal entry hall, adding some bracket walls, flanking the front doors, and adding, making clear the intention of the room. I just love his entrance hall. It's one of the best in the whole. It's one of the best units in the whole place, bar none. Marrakesh has 14 pools and pool houses, all designed by John Woolf, who actually designed everything but the clubhouse, which is a long story for another day. But this is, imagine living like this every day and for under $1 million. These houses were such a great value, and now they're being snapped up right now. Okay, so we've looked at what likely caused John Woolf's artistic and professional trajectory. Now I want to highlight the effects that he had on the surrounding environment and the culture. His style was so profoundly popular in his day that it spawned legions of imitators. Some, like Caspar Emke at the top right, were more literal in their adaptations. Bob Ray Offenhauser, more theatrical, from Pasadena. Thomas Lane summed it all up with a redesign for a modernist house in Truesdale Estates that would later become the home of Elvis and Priscilla Presley. It still looks like that today. Now, sometimes these likenesses would be of very high quality, like what we know of as the Drysdale Mansion, from the Beverly Hillbillies, if anybody remembers that. The Mercedes-Benz ad also was the same house, not by Woolf, this house. In fact, it looks more like a Woolf house than the actual Woolf house next door to its right. That is right next door, and it is real. The Sunset Plaza area was full of relatively faithful copies. This was a long time one of my favorites. And then there's Bob Ray getting all dramatic all over again on the lower right. I mean, those ceilings are enormously high. But one of the most important things to me, and you can't find his place on the spectrum of modernism without taking into consideration, are the sociological aspects of those who copied Woolf's elements. It wasn't just his style that people copied. It was also his do them over, mark them up, and sell them off business model, which today we call flipping. Often in West Hollywood, these designers who had come to LA to reinvent themselves would do so with small bungalows on a budget, mostly just sheathing a Spanish or clapboard house with a new skin or a big front door. Designer Dean Reynolds went one better with his duplex, taking a 5-unit apartment building in the Norma Triangle and making it into a 2-unit compound with a pool in between them, using highly exaggerated but recognizable Woolf signatures, like the window over the front door to show these chandeliers. The whole trade was examined closely and conclusions drawn by scholar and city planner John Leighton Chase in his 1982 book. It was he who actually coined the term Hollywood Regency, and the cover illustration shows a proud skin being applied to a dowdy, then dowdy, little house. Now, few at the time considered Chase's work real architectural criticism, but they said the same thing about Truesdale Estates. And where there's value, where you find value, you talk about it. His next book was called Glitter, Stucco, and Dumpster Diving, to show John's sensibility. He was a great guy. Now, the adaptation of the formerly aspirational elements of Hollywood Regency began to lose a lot of luster by overuse, starting in the 1970s. I mean, if something could be rolled out like a roll of tinfoil, like the mansard by the mile, I call it, it wasn't very exclusive anymore. Materials and proportions also produced a muddled message in lesser hands, as you can see on the right. So by the time postmodernism rolls around in the 1980s, misuse of classical forms becomes a cartoonish travesty, especially of proportion. Yes, Woolf had exaggerated proportions in his work, but was mostly to accentuate elegance. It was loving, while this was, even in the hands of Philip Johnson, I found it clownish. The result was Hollywood Regency was lumped in with postmodernism. And by the time the world had dumped that on the ash heap of architectural history, Woolf's work, which few knew how to categorize anyway, went with it. It didn't help that John Woolf died in 1980 and the Woolf office closed in 1983. The very late 1990s and early 2000s, though, saw a roaring revival of the Hollywood Regency style. Certainly, rediscovery of society photographer Slim Aaron's portfolio through books and articles made people wish they could live like this today, and the same way they did in his day. But the difference this time is that we're seeing Hollywood Regency emblemized more in housewares and decorative items like Jonathan Adler, or hotel ventures like those of Kelly Wearstler, for example. This coincides with the whole trend right now in resort living, or lifestyle getaways, as I call them. People going somewhere on vacation and saying, I want to live like this. And they find a place that they really makes them feel good. Or going away for an immersive design experience that they might not want to live with every day. One of the hotbeds of Hollywood Regency, surprisingly, has been Palm Springs. This house is not by John Woolf, but it's clear designer James McNaughton appropriated a number of Woolf's signatures. The columns, the ceremonial aspect of the architecture, those frilly bedroom curtains he used in a number of houses. Here's the house today. The crisp lines have held up very, very well, and that grand entrance is still very impressive. It was built for the Hearsts, actually. George and forget the wife's name, Millicent. Well, anyway, as I was saying, pretty much everything has been restored to original condition. The columns, the fireplaces, the statuary, and that formerly frilly bedroom is so much better today. The fireplace was brought in from one of the Hearst Castle storerooms, by the way, and the sitting room, like a little enclosed courtyard passage leading to the master bedroom, became a game room. The view from the main living room shows a few prized pieces of the owner's collection of lucite furnishings by Charles Hollis Jones. It may be the largest collection of his work in the world, and those pergolas by the pool, timeless. So, where does this leave Woolf in this century? Two important exhibitions of Woolf working drawings helped re-familiarize people with his work. UCSB in 2003, shortly after the archive was donated, put on an exhibition, and the program from that exhibition is still one of the Bibles of Woolf lore, with essays and an all-important project list. Palos Verdes Art Center in 2015 also showed a wealth of work from Woolf's own hand and garnered major publicity, as did a very important article in Vanity Fair in 2009. The profile of the Woolf Pack gave equal space to John and Robert Koch Woolf's familial arrangements and his architectural innovations, generating worldwide interest. Now, the house on the article's front page, the Vance House, the one on the left, was awarded landmark status by the city of Beverly Hills in 2017. And as I mentioned earlier, the Pendleton-Evans house, which we looked at in depth earlier, was granted the same designation in 2021. So as for guessing the future value and importance of Woolf's work, here's what to me is a very likely example. Built for actress Marjorie Lord of Make Room for Daddy fame. I'm too young to remember that reference. Something I'm finally too young to remember. In 2017, it was purchased by the architectural firm of Marmol Radziner as their first development project, not one of their own designs. This says a lot about the lasting value and appeal of Woolf's designs. Once again, proportions they reign. The ceiling finish is a Woolf original design. Some functional reorganization, since the room is big enough to accommodate full-size dining. Here's the revised floor plan, which stays mostly to the original. The couple of bedrooms were added on the left. The service areas were cleaned up on the right and incorporated into the kitchen. The kitchen now opens to the former dining room, which is now a family room. And which we show here, the kitchen opening to the family room. But the original bedroom, one of the original bedrooms retains its charm, especially with that shuttered courtyard with the oculus open to the sky. The master bedroom also retains the Woolf device of dropping the ceiling at the bays at both ends of the room. Now, I had to show you the master bath, which I think is almost as sexy as the original, which had the pool. The bottom photo is before the one at the top, and the pool was only accessible from the bathroom, which I think is just kicky. Now, the pool has since been relocated to the back of the house. That veranda is probably 20 feet deep at its deepest point, so indoor-outdoor entertaining ever since the 60s. And so we finished by looking out at Beverly Hills and the west side of LA, the city looking very different than when John Elgin Woolf arrived in 1937. And that difference is in no small part due to his architectural contributions and legacy and his romanticism, for which I thank him and I thank you. All right.
Thank you so very much for this wonderful presentation. There is a sense of gaiety and playfulness and celebration of life that is very contagious in Hollywood Regency style. And so thank you so much for putting us in such a great attitude and mode. I'd like to invite everyone to enter your questions in the Q&A. Again, by rolling your mouse through the lower part of your screen, you'll see the Q&A button there. Please enter any questions you may have for our speaker today. I'd like to start this conversation by asking you, Stephen, about your thoughts on how to properly frame Hollywood Regency within the history of modern architecture in Southern California. This is a question that many of our visitors have when they take a look at this section of John Elgin Woolf included in Genius Loci. There is, you know, it's an architecture that draws a lot of inspiration from the fiction that the movie industry inspires, and this aspirational lifestyle that you were talking about. And at the same time, you know, modern architects were very strict about the authenticity, the truthfulness of material use. You know, so I wonder even if there is a simplification of neo classical styles in John Elgin Woolf's architecture. How can we properly, you know, frame it? Is it modern, or does it need its own category? Just to understand it and to convey it to our audiences.
Well, and that is, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Am I on? Okay. That is a really, really new way of looking at whether he had a place alongside modernism or not. Because, you know, when I was growing up, it was very much treated as something all of its own, and that it had no relation to modernism. And now looking back, we can see where it did have some overlap. Hollywood Regency was invented in California. It was invented in the movies and then built here. It's a style that is distinctly Southern California. And so by its very nature, it will have a modern aspect to it because they were living modern lives. That's where the couple's house came from. It was things to make people feel new things about their daily lives in the environment they lived in. So yeah, there's a bunch of cases to be made for it being complementary to that. And as I said, I hope I found a number of cases that support that argument, especially when with the smaller houses that he would do. The larger houses were more flights of fancy, but the smaller ones, he had to think really hard about what they wanted to be and do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We have a question from the audience. Do you know how many Woolf houses are landmarked? And this is a question by Daniel Kaiser.
Yes, I love Daniel. I actually asked him to work on the Woolf book with me, because he's so smart. There are two in Beverly Hills, the Vance House, which was in the Vanity Fair article, and Woodland, which is the one currently under restoration. Beverly Hills has been very supportive of these projects in that, you know, John Woolf's really distills the essence of Beverly Hills in the 1960s and 50s. His greatest works are there, and they were so happy to pass those landmark designations. They couldn't wait for us all to shut up so they could just vote. So it's very supportive there. I know a lot of the Cultural Heritage commissioners really admire John Woolf's. Mm-hmm. Now, as for where else they might be landmarks in LA, I don't know. I think the Reynolds House in Hancock Park might be one. I'd have to check.
Okay. We also have a question from Jane Gottlieb. She's asking about the Surlo House in Bel Air that looked just like a John Woolf design. She's asking if you're familiar with it. The Surlo House.
Yeah, I'm not off the top of my head familiar with it. As I said, as I showed, there were a lot of copies, imitators of Woolf's work. Some were very, very good. Some were very, very faithful. And again, the ones like Caspar Emkes and Bud Holden and Bob Ray Offenhauser, they were finished to a very high degree. So it's very hard to tell sometimes when they weren't the real thing. I've found, as with every archive, the project list that I've been working from for so long isn't entirely complete. There might be a Zurlo house on there that I haven't seen before. Mm-hmm. That's why I like to go through.
Yeah, ever expanding research.
And I'm always finding something new. It's been amazing to have the privilege of going through the archives and putting that history together.
Mhm. Well, thank you. That's very nice to hear. Um, Trey Lefebvre is asking, is there a project list that is published by year and address?
Not that I know of. I was thinking of making one. I've intended to make one for like 10 years. But no, the one that the university published as part of its program for that first exhibition in 2003 is arranged by year, but you know, it's print. It's not like in Excel, so it's not searchable the same way. And you know, and it has some errors too. I mean, some addresses were wrong or whatever, but that's the closest thing we've got right now.
Mhm. Stephen, I wonder also about the reciprocity between architecture and set design and set production. I mean, Hollywood Regency clearly draws inspiration from everything that was going on in the movie industry in Hollywood. But did the architecture that Elgin Woolf contributed to shape the Hollywood Regency influence also the movie industry? Was this kind of a two-way influence or just a one-way?
I think you can see it going both ways. Now, first of all, James Dolina, for example, who built the Conrad Hilton House and built a lot of set designs for the movies that created that style. He worked in both, so he would take things that were pleasing to him or the client in one and interpret them into the other. You will see in the 60s, for example, maybe even the 50s. Certain people would be put in Hollywood Regency houses as part of their personality, of their character. So I think there was definitely a big give and take. And that's part of where the revival came from. If you look at movies like Tom Ford's A Single Man, the Julianne Moore character lives in an identifiably wonderful Hollywood Regency house. And that speaks to her character being somebody who's wild and wealthy and beautiful.
Great, yeah. Reminds me of several houses that were pretty wild in Hollywood, also built around the same time. Tom Bergfeld is asking if you have looked into the Aldrich home of 1949 in Fresno, in California. Another
I have, yeah, no, I haven't, and it's amazing where you find that he built in a lot of these communities, small communities in Central California, and I mean to look at everything to see what links to each other, what has clues for each other. I'll give you an example of what I mean. When I was researching the Marrakesh book, I discovered that Johnny Dawson had hired John Wolfe to design the El Dorado Country Club, which everybody knows is famously by William F. Cody. Well, after a year, apparently Dawson had to fire Wolfe from that project, and it was a crushing blow. The men didn't speak for many, many years, and 10 years later, Dawson brought him back to design Marrakesh. I mean, he asked him to do stuff all that time, and that was the first thing they got done. So I only found that out reading the letters that were in the El Dorado archive and the Marrakesh archive. I mean, nobody knows that Wolfe had anything to do with the initial development of El Dorado.
We also wonder about the livability of these wonderful houses. How does Hollywood Regency reconcile this mission to impress and to make guests feel like in awe with the daily duties of living in a home and cleaning the dishes and all of that? How livable are these spaces?
Well, that's, I think, what was demonstrated in the last house, the one that the Marmel Radziner redid and sold to Ellen DeGeneres, by the way. And she sold it to somebody else, the way she does. It works well enough. Like, for example, the formal dining room had been converted to a family room. So that's something that can be done. It has been done. And so people, because it was actually made to kind of a formalistic style of the 60s, but then, well, I'm not phrasing that very well. I'll tell you one thing though, the smaller house, the first one that we looked at, that was built from his first house, that's a very diminutive house. So it's easy to go in and feel just like you're in a jewel box all the time, and it works on an everyday basis. The photos I showed were from designer Nate Burgess and Jeremiah Brent, who decorated the house, but the architecture was already there. So those elements are delightful in and of themselves. If you use rooms a different way, that's fine.
Well, we are reaching the point of closing this wonderful webinar. I want to extend my deepest gratitude to you. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful trip. We just want to see these houses live and join you perhaps in a tour of the real thing. So we can really experience those wonderful proportioned spaces and dream a little bit more.
Yes.
Possible.
I'm working on that. I did one for Palos Verdes Art Center in 2015, and it was a wonderful experience. And because a lot of the time you cannot get in to see these houses, they're not open to people unless they're invited. So yeah, I'm definitely making a point of trying to pull that together so people can experience them.
Fantastic. We'll take your word.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And yeah, we'll see you soon. And thank you everybody who's following. We will publish this webinar on our YouTube channel very soon, so you will be able to rewatch it if you need so. So thank you everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you everybody.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.